Three-stage growth model part 2. We have discussed the basic assumptions and the working of three-stage growth model of common stock valuation. In this module, we'll try to learn the application of this model using an example. As there are 3 stages, so we have to calculate the values of all these 3 stages independently, and finally we'll get the sum of the 3 stages, which will be our final intrinsic value. So let's assume this data to learn to apply this three-stage growth model. D0 is equal to rupees 5, that is the last year's dividend. G1, G2 and G3 are the growth rates of the 3 stages, which are 7, 6 and 5%, and the time period is from year 1 to 3, from year 4 to 5, and ultimately from year 6 till infinity. The required rate of return of investors is 10% per annum, and we are required to calculate the intrinsic value of the stock. Now in the stage 1, as we have discussed earlier, that individually the 3 dividends will be calculated, that is D1, D2 and D3, by multiplying D0 with the growth rate factor. So D1 will be 5 multiplied by 1 plus 7%, where 5 is the last year's dividend and 7% is the first year's growth rate. So we'll get D1 equal to 5.35. Similarly, further growing it at 7%, in the second year we'll get 5.73 and 6.13 in the third year. From the fourth year, we'll have the second stage of the growth rate of the dividend. But before that, these dividends are to be discounted and their present values are to be calculated. So the first stage is from year 1 to 3, and the dividends are 5.35, 5.73 and 6.13, and the discounting rate is 10%. So we get the discounted value of the first 3 years as 4.86, 4.74 and 4.61. इन तीनों values को हम जमा करेंगे तो हमारे पास पहली stage की value आ जाएगी, which is V1 14.21. In the second stage, we have got only 2 years, that is 4th and 5th. So the first step is to calculate the dividends of year 4 and year 5. But remember, here the growth rate has changed to 6%. So we'll start with the dividend of year 3, which is 6.13, and grow it at 6% to get the dividend of 4th year, which is 6.5. इस डिविडेंड को हम 6% के लिहाज से मजीद 1 साल के लिए ग्रो करेंगे और 6.89 हमारे पास एक्सपेक्टेड डिविडेंड होगा ऑफ ईयर 5. Then the process is to calculate their present values. So the present value of D4, which is 6.5, will be divided by the present value interest factor, and so we get the dividend present value equal to 4.44. यानी ये 4th year के dividend की present value है. And the 5th year's dividend present value is also calculated in the same manner, which is 4.28. तो ये दोनों values second stage के dividends की present values हैं. इन्हें हम add करेंगे and the sum will be the intrinsic value of the second stage of this 3-stage growth model. And finally, we move to the third stage, where we'll apply the constant growth model. The third stage starts from year 6 onwards. So we'll take the dividend of year 5 and we'll grow it for 1 year. यानी 5th year का dividend 6.89 था, इसको third stage के growth rate के हिसाब से grow करेंगे and we'll get the dividend, expected dividend of year 6 as 7.24. 7.24 will be divided by R minus G3, that is 10 minus 5%, and we get the answer equal to 144.8 rupees. This is the value of third stage. Now finally we'll have to discount it, and this discounted value will be equal to 89.91, and this further discounted value will then be added in the first two values that we have calculated, which are 14.21, 8.72, and then we get the final intrinsic value, which is 112.84. What we need to do is that we have to compare it with the market price, as we have learned to do in the earlier modules. और वही रूल हमारे सामने रहेगा कि अगर मार्केट प्राइस इंट्रिंसिक वैल्यू के बराबर हो या मार्केट प्राइस इंट्रिंसिक वैल्यू से कम हो, दोनों केसेस के अंदर हम रिकमेंड करेंगे कि स्टॉक को ख़रीद लिया जाए, और अगर मार्केट प्राइस इंट्रिंसिक वैल्यू से ज़्यादा हो जाए तो हम रिकमेंड करेंगे कि इस प्राइस पर इस शेयर के अंदर इन्वेस्टमेंट ना की जाए. In the third stage, we calculate the value by applying the constant growth formula. This formula is applied at the end of 5th year or at the beginning of 6th year. So the first step is to calculate the next year's dividend, which in this case will be D6. So D6 will be calculated by multiplying D5 with the next year's growth rate, and that is 7.24. This will be divided by the difference of R and the growth rate, and ultimately the value comes out to be 144.8, which will then be discounted for a period of 5 years in order to get the value of V3. Finally, the three stages, that is first, second and third, their individual values will be combined as V1, V2 and V3. The intrinsic value will then be calculated, and that is 112.84. The decision will be made by comparing the intrinsic value with that of the market price, and the rule is the same, that if market price is equal to the intrinsic value or the market price is less than the intrinsic value, the recommendation will be to purchase the stock, because that will give us our required rate of return or more than that. The only case in which we will not recommend purchase of the stock is if the market price is greater than the intrinsic value, which in this case is 112.84.